My name is Blake Bailey, and I am the team lead for customer success here at Process Street. I'm also the lead for the customer education team, a customer content team. And what we're going to be going over today are first off, the basics of automation, what that means generally, then the basics of automation in Process Street, how you actually build some of those automations in Process Street, some of the ways you're able to do that. And then we're going to go through what I like to call some full cycle or advanced automations towards the end. And I'm going to take you through how those work, why you want to use them, and then how to build them as well. So you're going to get a little bit of everything during this broadcast today. First off, let's start off a little bit, a little bit basic here. Now, what is automation? Okay, automation, as you can see in the dictionary, is the technique of making an apparatus, a process, or a system operate automatically, which I think is kind of a cheap shot of kind of answering that question, isn't it? What I like to say is that automation is removing you, the human, from the process. Automation, if you're interested, actually comes from the Greek word automatos, which means to think for themselves, okay? And that's just a weird way of kind of putting that, but that's the general idea. Essentially, you create a system that thinks for itself. It doesn't require you to be involved, you, the human, that is. Now, why would you want that? Why do you want to not be involved in things? Well, the first thing is it'll save you money. When you are not having to actually do manual things, well, you're not going to have to pay yourself or pay others or waste the time to get those things done. They're just going to happen, which means that there's no additional revenue or additional cost involved with that particular thing. And of course, the big result of that is that you're also saving time, right? So you're saving time in your process, either it's your time, it's someone else's time, whatever it might be, you are going to be saving time for you or your employees, which then of course saves money. And a big part of that is also that you're reducing errors, okay? Humans are prone to errors. It's just what we do. It's just kind of a thing, of course. You do things, even if you're very good at things, if you're ever interested in this, there's sort of a curve. When you're first learning something, you're going to be pretty bad at it because you don't know it, but then you get really good at it because you're really not comfortable with it yet, but you get the idea, right? So you get really good at it. And then you get too confident. And you're good at it, but you're too confident. So you start skipping things. And that's where you also start hitting errors. So there's plenty of points in a process where you may hit an error, and computers don't go through that phase. They just don't. They either work or they don't. And once they work, they just continue to work for the most part. So that's how you can reduce errors. And of course, errors can be costly. They can be risky. They can lead to lawsuits in some cases. And of course, all of that stuff increases the amount of time because you have to redo things or handle that other stuff that comes up. And of course, all those other things that can happen can be very costly. So if you can eliminate all of it from the beginning, you're going to also save money. All of these things wrapped up together mean that you are going to increase your efficiency, your operational efficiency. You're not wasting time on unnecessary things, especially errors. And therefore, you can just focus on what matters. That's really the key here about why you want to use automation. A lot of people are really scared of automation, and I think that that's fair. A lot of people are scared that automation is going to take over and get rid of a lot of jobs, and I know in a lot of industries that has happened. However, it doesn't have to be that way. In an ideal world, what can really happen with automation is that it makes your job easier. So what it does is that it removes you out of the process from the manual, repetitive things that humans really aren't as good at, especially compared to computers, so that you as a human can focus on what humans are really good at, what really matters in a process, which is human connection. So if you need to talk to someone and really connect with them, computers will never be able to do that to the level that a human can. Additionally, if you need to create things or be inventive or lead people, well, those sort of things, those interpersonal connections, those creative endeavors are things that humans are good at and that computers just aren't. So that's why you want to focus on those things, reduce the manual repetitive stuff, give that to a computer, and then focus on the shiny diamonds, those things that really matter for your process. Now, we've talked generally about automation. Let's actually get specific about what I call the three main types of automation. There's different ways to think about automation, but these are some basic ones that I like to throw out there just because they're easy to grasp and they make sense to be able to break this down. First off, there is what I call a hybrid automation. So this still requires some human interaction. So the human interaction may come at the beginning or in the middle of a process. It realistically could also happen at the end, but at that point, really, it's already happened and therefore I wouldn't necessarily count it. So hybrid automations are where a human may initiate something ad hoc or as needed. So a good example of that is maybe a brand new client has walked in your door and you need to run a checklist for welcoming them. Or maybe someone's given you, someone's called you or sent you an email and you need to handle that as like a ticket, right? Well, it's as needed. So maybe you're going to run a checklist in Process Street, right? And you'd like that to be triggered automatically just by you clicking a button or something like that. Then you run the process, you go through it, and the rest of it can maybe then be automated. So all the rest of it can be automated. So notifying people, triaging things, whatever it might be, that can all be automated just by you clicking the initial thing. The other part of that may be where you're in the middle. So that's for something like QA. That's not questions and answers, that's quality assurance. So a good example of that is maybe you have a process that is automated at the very beginning and goes all the way through, but then before it gets to the end, it stops. And what it does is that maybe the last little bit is also an automation, and that last little bit is really sensitive. So maybe it's generating a legal document and sending it to maybe your client or vendor for signature. And you don't want it to be fully automated because what if there's a problem somewhere down the line, maybe before it got to that point, that was going to mess up the legal document, or they're going to sign something that they shouldn't, right? Well, that's where you want to maybe put a human in there to just be an additional set of oversight over that process. So you go through and it stops, notifies you. You say, okay, let me take a look at this. Oh, here's this thing. There's a typo in that person's name. Let me correct that. You just make one little edit. Then you say, good to go. You hit that off, and then it does the rest of it automated. So that is a hybrid automation. Those are really useful for QA. It's a little bit more manual because it does require a human in the process, but for processes that are sensitive or completely as needed or ad hoc or unpredictable, it gives you the benefit of automation plus the benefit of oversight. Next is the scheduled automation. Scheduled automation can be fully automated, but you have set it up to be on a predictable routine. So that's something like maybe your weekly accounting, weekly manager check-ins, monthly financial analysis, whatever it might be that happens on a routine basis. So based off of something like every week, every day, every month, whatever it might be, that's where you want to create a scheduled automation. Pretty straightforward. Finally, you have what I call the complete or pure automation, okay? This is an automation that is triggered off of something external that is not a human, okay? So an example is maybe you have a automation that will watch the stock market, watch for a specific stock. So you're watching, I don't know, Apple stock. And when Apple stock goes above a certain point, you want your automation to trigger to, and maybe you're working in stocks, it's going to buy some stocks, or it's just going to notify you that that stock has gone up or gone down or whatever else. Similarly, maybe when it's going to rain, you'd like to get a text message that tells you that it's about to rain. Well, you don't control the weather. You don't control the markets, I don't think. So those are not human-generated triggers. And then what actually happens, so you get notified, the thing getting sent off, something getting bought potentially, those are complete. There's no human involved. It's just happening without you having to do a single thing. You may not even know that it happened. And that actually is where the risk is involved with these types of automations. They are, on one hand, the most useful because you're not bothered at all. It can happen while you're asleep. On the other hand, though, they can just happen and go crazy without your oversight. So in these sort of systems, one, you always want to limit risk by not giving it something that is really inherently risky, like actually buying a bunch of stocks, unless you know what you're doing. And then on the other hand, you also want to build in essentially fail safes and other sorts of things to just prevent it from going haywire and doing something terrible. So those are the three main types of automations. There's other ways to kind of parse up automations, but these are the three ways that I like to kind of talk about them because they kind of break them up into these big groups. Now, going from the more general concept of automation, let's go into types of automation in Process Street specifically. Now, before I move forward, I want to mention that these types of automation are specific to Process Street. However, you can extract them out for other tools, okay? So other tools are gonna have these sorts of things, give or take. Not every single one does, but you can definitely kind of apply this to other tools that you use or other things that you do. But I'm gonna use Process Street as the example because obviously it's what we do and it's gonna make the most sense, and you all use Process Street or at least are aware of it. And therefore, it'll be a good way to kind of grasp something tangible that you can then put to other things. Ready? All right, so when we're talking about types of automation specific to Process Street, there are three main types that I like to discuss. First are built-in automations. Second are what I call direct integration automations. And third are indirect or connector automations. Okay, I'm going to go through each of these individually now. Let's start with built-in automations. What I'm about to show you are a few features inside of Process Street that are what I would consider built-in automations because they're going to save you time, they're going to increase your efficiency, reduce errors, all those sorts of things. And you don't have to do anything really additional to build it because it already exists. We've done the work for you. And you can just benefit from it. Again, other tools have built-in automation features as well, so you can use those. But again, this is not a full list of every type of automated feature inside of Process Street. There's a lot, and I could spend an entire webinar just doing that, and I have. So I'm just going to focus on some of the big ones that I want to mention here. First off, I know this one seems simple, but assignments and due dates. Yes, you can go into a specific checklist inside of Process Street and assign one task or the entire checklist to a specific person for that one time. And therefore, every time you need to do it in the future, you're going to manually go in and do it over and over again every single time. Same thing for the due dates. Maybe you're saying that this one time, this thing is going to be due on Friday, and then the next time it runs, you're going to go in there manually and set it and say this time it's due on Thursday. Yes, you can manually do that. That's fine. But instead, you can actually automate that inside of Process Street by going into the template, so the master version of your process. And you can say that every time that a checklist is run off of this particular template, I'd like to assign this particular person. I can even rotate between different people using what's called role assignments if you like. But again, it'll automatically assign them every single time. So you're just doing that same assignment just once, and then it's going to automatically happen from now on forever. Same thing goes for due dates. If you've got a particular pattern, so maybe every single time a new client comes in, as soon as they come in, you need to collect their information and generate all the things you need to do within 3 days, right? To stay on your timeline. Well, you can say that. You could say inside of Process Street, inside of the template for that task, this needs to be due 3 days after the checklist was first started. Maybe you've got a meeting coming up, and for every time you run this, whenever you have a meeting date set, you'd like to make sure that you have a meeting agenda prepared for that meeting, say 5 days before, as you can see in this example here. So you just say 5 days before the meeting date, and that's a form field that you have inside of Process Street that you can even automatically get filled out with the data. Then these tasks will automatically be due. Assignments and due dates are really useful because if you think about it, it saves you at least 2 notifications per task. Okay, so if you've got 10 tasks, that's 20 emails that you don't have to send. So you don't have to send the original notification to say, hey, you're assigned. You don't have to send the second notification saying, hey, you didn't do it by the due date. So that's 2 things. And you could add on a third, which is you didn't have to even think to assign or set the due date on that particular task that time. So that's 3 things per task. Multiply that out by the number of tasks, multiply that out by the number of times you actually run this, and then that's the amount of things that you've actually saved. And that just continues to grow as you use that automation. Next, inbox. So assignments and due dates are really useful for sending those notifications and essentially making sure that everyone's being aware of what they need to do and when they need to do it by. Well, you can get those as an email, and that's perfectly fine. But what I really recommend is that you potentially even turn those notifications off. Instead, you use inbox. So instead, you go into your Process Street inbox. It's right at the top of the page. You'll see this little button that says inbox. You go to your inbox each morning or whenever you start your day. Maybe you start later. And it will automatically have all of your assigned tasks and checklists from across the entire organization collated into this one place and sorted by the due date. So you don't have to go hunting for things, figuring out what you need to do. And then you don't need to try and think about what order you need to do them in because it's already done for you. It's already here. It's already brought together for you, and it's already sorted. You can do everything that you would do inside of that checklist or that task inside of Inbox itself, so you don't have to go anywhere else. And you can sort of just trigger off automations, do whatever you need to do. Just come into here, get your work done, have it prioritized for you, and that's it. So that saves you a massive amount of time, especially when paired with those assignments and the due dates. Speaking of saving time, people spend a lot of time writing emails, right? Email is a very common way to communicate, especially with clients or vendors, unless you have them in Slack for some reason. But if you're sending emails, you're going to want to use what's called the send email widget. Again, this is built into Process Street. What this does is that if you have parts of your email that are standard, for example, the body of that email, we are so glad that you decided to go with code. Like that's the same thing you're going to say every single time to your new client, right? So that's not going to change. So write it once, put it into your send email widget, and then anything that's dynamic, for example, their email address or their name, so Elon or Elon Musk right there, emusk@tesla.com, you can go ahead and use what's called variables inside of Process Street to pull those values from the form fields elsewhere in your checklist and then put them immediately and directly into here. Okay, so you don't have to type anything in here, you don't have to do anything at all except click send, and that will go ahead and generate this email, and then you can just click send inside of whatever is your default email handler without ever having to touch your keyboard. That's it. So you never have to type this email up ever again. It's automatically done for you. You click send, and then you send it. And again, that is a built-in feature. You don't have to build anything for that. You just set it up inside of your template once, and you're good to go. Additionally, we're dealing with notifications. We have approvals. So if you have any sort of process where something needs to go to someone else for approval, they need to read through some documents, they need to see what information you have here. For example, you have some reports here that you need to notify people about, they need to review. You have some information about the client's current strategies that need to be reviewed as well. Well, rather than sending that in an email to somebody to approve and then them looking at it and having to go find those documents and then go through that whole process of reviewing it and then saying no and then notifying you and then going back and forth over email, 20 emails deep, spending so much time to try and do that when everyone's so busy, well, you just check off a task inside of Process Street. That person gets notified. If they reject it, it notifies you automatically. You come back in, you resubmit it, it notifies them again automatically, and then they can approve it. And then when that's all done, it notifies you finally, again, automatically, of course. And you just continue on with the process. You have had no emails interchanged between you that any of you had to write. It was all just pressing buttons, and that was it. Finally, the schedule checklist. Of course, I mentioned to you earlier scheduled automations and how useful they can be. Scheduled checklist makes use of that inside of Process Street itself. So if you have any sort of process, for example, maybe you write a blog every single month, and maybe you've got a blog article that is, and maybe you've got a couple of those that you do. You can, of course, set up multiple of these if you like. But if you want this to repeat, say, every single month, you just set that up in there. You assign maybe yourself or someone else or multiple people, whatever you like. You can even automate the creation of the name of that checklist, as you see there. You can also set specific due dates as well to say this is going to be due 10 days after this first runs. And you can set dynamic due dates and assignments and things of that nature inside of the template itself to automate even more things based off of this once this actually runs. So you set this up once, and you will never ever have to click Run Checklist or remember to click Run Checklist, that's the important part, to write your blog article ever again. The only effort that you'll have is trying to ignore it if you don't want to do it. That's really it. So that's a scheduled checklist. Again, this is not a full list of all of the automated built-in features inside of Process Street. These are just some big ones that kind of really bring the point home that you can do lots of automated things in the tools that you love. All right, now we're going to move on to direct integration automations. So before I go into this, what I want to mention is that a key theme in Process Street is the concept of flexibility and customizability, okay? So what that means is that these direct integrations are not truly say, this is a direct integration to Dropbox or something along those lines, because that would just be one connection, and maybe you use Box and you would be out of luck. Well, instead, what we've done here at Process Street is that we have given you a couple different ways to directly integrate Process Street with the tools that you love, but you have the flexibility to essentially choose what tool that is. So we haven't made that decision for you. So keep that in mind, here we go. So those direct integrations, first one, checklist run links, okay? So this allows you to kick off a process, kick off a checklist from whatever tool that you like, okay? So this could be something like your CRM, right? So maybe you have all of your customer data in there, and when a customer, maybe they request a, some change to their account, they want to add more seats, they want to go ahead and whenever they've paid their contract, whatever else it might be, you want to go ahead and maybe onboard them. Well, you can automate that, and I'll show you that in a little bit in terms of automating it so that when you change something in that system, it just runs the checklist for you automatically, but maybe you want a little bit more control, right? So maybe it isn't something that's happening in there. You just want to run it as needed. you still want to get the benefit of all of the form fields in your checklist being automatically filled out with the information from that database, from that tool. And so the way that you do that is via the checklist run link. And you get there by going to share template inside of Process Street, and then right, you'll get this little pop-up right here. You just click run link. At the bottom of this little module here, you'll see a little thing that says link options. You can actually choose different form fields from your checklist that you'd like to get pre-filled. So you're getting a pre-filled checklist, and then you just take that link, go to whatever tool you'd like to kick off the process from, say for example, Salesforce. And then those tools will typically have a way for you to build what's called a custom link or a custom button. You just match up the fields from that tool with the link and the form fields in your checklist. And then what will happen is that you just, as you see in this bottom picture here, that's what these links, these are our actual links here that we use, Process Street. This is what we actually use to run onboarding for customers like you. We click on that run onboarding checklist link. That automatically creates the client onboarding checklist for us. It pulls all of the customer data from Salesforce, fills out the checklist for us. So then once we run it, we're just reviewing things and doing what we need to do. So really, really easy, great way to go from a different tool into Process Street. Now, what if you want to go from Process Street to your tool? So you're going the opposite direction. Well, that's where you want to use webhooks. So webhooks allow you to trigger off of specific events inside of Process Street and have the data from that event sent to a tool that you use. So a good example of that is maybe for client onboarding here, maybe you have a Slack channel where you track your clients, right? So you can say that when the checklist is completed, so in this case, the client is onboarded, I would like to push all of the data about that client and their onboarding into the Slack channel, okay? You can do that. There's plenty of other tools that accept webhooks, lots of them do. So if it accepts a webhook, you can go ahead and tie it to Process Street directly and get the data in there and maybe create a new row, update something, send a message in Slack, whatever it might be. As long as it connects, can accept webhooks, you can connect Process Street to it. Not only when checklists are completed, but also when they are created. So when they first run, maybe you can have that also post to that Slack channel so you know the checklist or a client is beginning to be onboarded, and then you know when they have finished to be onboarding. And that way you have 2 time points you can compare. Additionally, you also have the ability to trigger these when tasks are checked or unchecked, which is really useful because, of course, different steps in the process, maybe you want to get notified more granularly, okay? So those are the 2 main options for direct integrations in Process Street. There's other little things you can do. Technically, the send email widget is also a direct integration because it sends, creates the email in whatever tool that you use for your emails automatically. But it's also a built-in feature, so I count it as both. Okay, you're now on to the final and really the big meaty part of this presentation, kind of my favorite part, to be honest with you. These are my indirect integration partner automations. That's a lot of words. I would also call these connectors, okay? And in the world of connectors, really you have some really big players, okay? And there's lots of ways to kind of think about this. What these do is that rather than having direct connections, say between Process Street and Dropbox or Google Calendar or anything like that, what this allows you to do is to essentially connect whatever tools you want, right? So it's not one connection that you either have or you don't. You have the ability to choose, okay? So a connector sits in the middle of the tools that you love. For example, Process Street to Google Calendar, Salesforce to Process Street, whatever else you use, right? You can use these connectors to sit in the middle to tie them together without you having to build some crazy API connection or anything like that on your own. Now, in regards to Process Street, there are 2 main types of connectors that we connect with, okay? This is just at the moment. Now, the first one, and this is the oldest one for us, is Zapier, okay? Zapier, just like any other sort of connector, connects different digital services together. And again, is the one that we've used, we've been connected to the longest. So there's just more information about it and that sort of a thing. It's also the one that I'm going to be focusing on for the latter part of this broadcast. So I'll go ahead and kind of skip past this part because you're going to hear more of it later. Next is Integromat. This is actually newer. Within the last year or 2, we have a connection to Integromat now. And really, these are the two main ones you want to look at. Integromat, similar sort of concept, again, connects ProcessStreet to whatever other sort of tools that you may be using, as long as they're also connected to Integromat. You can build out those sort of workflows in there. Really, really easy to use. It's very visual. It's very nice. There are some things you can do in Integromat that you can't do inside of Zapier. There's some things you can do inside of Zapier you can't do inside of Integromat. And similarly, there's different services that may be connected to one and not the other. So I do recommend trying them both out. You can use both of them for free, by the way. Big deal there. They do have paid plans, and you can, of course, move up to those paid plans if you like, but you can also use them both for free forever and still get a lot of benefits. So I always recommend just signing up, maybe sign up for both of them, mess around with it, try it out, especially after this broadcast today, and just see what you can do, okay? All right, so I'm going to focus today, though, on Zapier specifically. Importantly, though, a lot of the concepts I'm going to be talking about can be extracted out to other tools like Integromat. Also other tools like If This Then That. That's sort of the big one. That's the consumer one that you see. Less business tools, more consumer stuff, really cool things. And lots of other things like Parabola and Microsoft Power Automate, previously Microsoft Flow. So whatever sort of connector you're using, these sort of concepts do apply. I'm going to be speaking again specific to Zapier and ProcessStreet, just to kind of, again, give you something tangible and immediate you can work with. So let's talk about how you actually build out an automation using Zapier and ProcessStreet. Now, inside of Zapier, if you're building an automation, they call that a zap, Z-A-P, okay? And a zap has two main components. And this is the same sort of concept as any other, again, any other tool, right? They're going to have these main components. They just might call them something different. So Zapier calls the very first part of that a trigger. What that means is, when something happens somewhere, that's the trigger. Zapier, I want you to watch for this thing. Okay, I want you to watch this tool, and specifically, I want to watch for this event in this tool. Okay, examples of that might be a new email. So maybe a new email that matches a search. By the way, Mohammed, I see your question, and so I'm answering it right now. So a new email that maybe matches a specific search. So it's from, if you get email from a specific address that has this subject line, and it's on this date. I mean, whatever sort of filters that you want to use, you can use those. Again, this is just an example. That could be your trigger. So you get that email, that triggers off the automation. That is what Zapier is watching for in your Gmail, okay? Same thing with Airtable, Salesforce, ProcessStreet, et cetera. You're essentially saying, watch for this thing to happen, and when that happens, kick off the automation and then do something. That something is the action, okay? That is what I want the automation to do for me on my behalf, okay? And the important thing here is that you actually can have multiple actions. It doesn't have to just be one thing. It could be, 100 things that are all triggered off of that first initial trigger. But just for simplicity, I will just speak of this as one single action. So you have a trigger and an action, but consider that, of course, you can do lots of things. Okay, so that action might be creating a checklist in ProcessStreet. And a good example is maybe you get, again, a new client has come in. So it's a new lead, right? Maybe you need to run a sales prospecting checklist in ProcessStreet. We're going to, qualify that lead, okay? And you'd like that to run automatically when that new lead comes in. That new lead coming in is the trigger. The checklist being run is the action. And you can have all the data from that about that lead come from Salesforce and get pushed into ProcessStreet. Nice and easy. Again, you can do that with lots of things: creating events in Google Calendar, posting messages to Slack automatically, sending emails, updating information in your CRM. Whatever it might be, lots of options there. Again, really, there are millions, if not billions, of options here that you can do, okay? Now, those are the general components of a Zap. Let's talk about what you can do specifically with ProcessStreet, okay? Now, to start off with triggers, again, this is where you are going to kick off an automation from ProcessStreet. So you are sitting inside of ProcessStreet, potentially inside of a checklist, and you would like it to maybe send an email or update something, right? Because you maybe checked off a task in your checklist. Well, you check off a task and you want to automatically create a new row in your spreadsheet. Well, the trigger in this case is new task checked, and that is by far the most common trigger that people use here with ProcessStreet inside of Zapier. Just because you have a lot of customizability, you just say, in that task, you say, this is what this is going to do if you check it off. And when you do that, that triggers off whatever you want it to be. So you can have an entire checklist full of automations, 10 steps, and 10 of those are things that are going to trigger off automations, one each. Additionally, you can also have it triggered right when the checklist is created. You can also have it triggered when maybe someone posts a comment or puts an attachment at the bottom of a task. And again, there's a comment and attachment box at the bottom of every single task. You never have to think to build that in. That's just there, okay? And when someone posts a comment or puts an attachment, you can say when that happens, maybe upload that attachment to Dropbox, right? So you automatically back it up. There's an idea. Or maybe when someone posts a comment, go ahead and put that into Slack so we have a thread going on there. So, maybe if you're not sitting in Process Street, you'll still get notified. So there are options for triggers, again, coming from Process Street to a different service. But what if you want to go from a different service to Process Street? So it's going the opposite direction, okay? Well, you've got three main actions available. Those are to create a brand new checklist. That's really the most common one that you see. So again, that might be that the trigger might be that maybe, again, you get the new client, or you have a new row added to a spreadsheet, or maybe you have a new order that's come in QuickBooks. Well, maybe you need to reconcile it, right? So in that case, what will happen is that new order coming in, that is the trigger. And then the action would be to create a brand new checklist off of maybe the order reconciliation template. And then what's going to happen at that point is that you can fill out, have that checklist filled out with all the order information from QuickBooks in that case. And then it can assign all the appropriate people, and you run through it, and that's pretty much it, right? And you can trigger things off from that point too, from Process Street to do other things. The other types of actions are then to update an existing checklist. So maybe instead of having to create a brand new checklist every time, maybe there's already a checklist that exists, and you just want it to update with new information that's come in partway through. So that's really useful. It can find a checklist, which is that third option, maybe by any form field, any sort of data that's in that checklist. It can find that checklist, and then it can go ahead and update it, okay? And updating it means that it's going to update a form field, update who's assigned, maybe even mark it as completed if you want. So lots of options there for the actions, again, for going into Process Street. Okay, so that's enough of talking about automations, and specifically in this case, Zapier, from a hypothetical or theoretical standpoint. Let's actually start building some stuff, okay? So inside of Zapier, when you log in, you will see a button that says Make a Zap. Inside of any sort of tool, you will see a button similar to this. Of course, they won't call it a Zap, they'll call it something else. Create a recipe, create a flow, whatever else. There'll just be a button for it. You click that button. I always recommend that you do, because that's how you actually initiate the creation of your automations, okay? So let's do that. And so this button, I just brought it into here to make this a little bit easier. So it'll take a second just to load. But pretty much what this is going to do is it's going to create a brand new Zap for us. There we are. And so again, this is completely brand new. I've never touched this before in terms of this is a brand new Zap, right? So I'm going to build it out from scratch with you guys right here. And for that reason, I'm going to keep it simple just to give you guys the idea to start. Don't worry, the next thing I'm going to show you after this one, though, is a lot more advanced. So if you're bored of basic stuff, this is the last basic thing you'll see. So right here, what we're going to do is we're just going to start off really easy. Let's just say that you have a weekly sales prospecting checklist, right? So every week, maybe on Monday at 9 a.m., you would like to run a checklist automatically, assign the appropriate people, and then have that just run. You go in there, you get it done, okay? Well, instead of having to remember every week to go and do that, of course, you can schedule this inside of Process Street. So building this doesn't, make perfect sense. You don't have to do it in here, but this is a very basic and straightforward way to kind of show you how this works. So right here, what you're saying is when this happens, this is the trigger inside of Zapier. This is, we're saying, watch for this thing. With a schedule, well, that's easy. We're saying watch for a specific day and time. We're going to say every week, and we're going to specify here every Monday at, in this case, we're going to say 9 a.m. We want this to run. So whenever you're building any sort of automation inside of Zapier, it's going to ask you to test out each step just to make sure that things are working right. Of course, this can find days and times. It's actually going to find today. See right there? It's just saying, can you find a day and time? Of course it can, because we exist. All right, so let's move forward here. So that's the trigger. Again, your triggers can be more complicated than that. It usually will be, in the sense of like it may be you're watching your email, you're watching Process Street, you're watching your CRM, whatever else. That can be the trigger, right? But again, I'm going to keep it basic just so you get the idea. So now here, again, we want to run the checklist in Process Street. So we're going to choose Process Street as the app here for the action, the do this. That means what do you want it to do? That's the action. And we want to create a brand new checklist. There we are. We're going to go ahead and continue. And whenever you're using an actual tool, like an external tool from Zapier, then you need to specifically connect it. You may need to connect it for the very first time, but once you've connected it, you'll just have a list like this, or it'll just be the one that shows up. You want to go ahead and select whichever account you want to use. For me, I've got a billion different Process Street accounts, of course. So let's leave that up. There we are. We go ahead and continue. All right, so now this is where you want to get a little bit more specific, right? So we're creating a checklist, but we don't want to just create a random checklist. We want it to be specific to that template. So we're going to choose the weekly sales prospecting checklist, okay? It's a specific template in our organization. The checklist name, well, this is where we can actually write in both essentially repeating stuff, so static pieces of information. So prospecting checklist, week of, and then you can put in dynamic things. For example, the date, in this case, week of September 3rd, 2020. So next Monday when this runs, I forget what date that'll be, but it'll say week of whatever date that is. And the next week after that will be, whatever week that is. So that'll go ahead and have this little bit always at the beginning, and then this little bit that'll change. And you can do that with all of these things. You can do really interesting dynamic things, for example, like setting a due date, right? And you can say, I want it to be maybe not this date, because that's today. We want it to be due maybe 4 days later. So we can say space plus 4D. If you ever want to look up what I just did here, this date modification, just go right there. This little icon, click on that. That'll open up a page for you that'll explain how to do this, all right? Really basically, once you get it, it's literally just saying space, and then you just learn D is day, M is minutes, months, weeks, etc. And you can easily modify your dates and times. So this will be this date plus 4 days. Actually, let's do 5 days. Just make it nice and easy. There we are. Now, from there, we can also assign specific people if we like as well. So in this case, I will assign myself. And we can fill out all these other fields if we want to. This is where we would fill out form fields. These are form fields inside of the actual template that'll actually fill out inside of the checklist. And again, we can push in information from here if we like. So if we trigger this off of a different tool, we can pull in information from that tool and fill out the form fields in this way. But again, I'm keeping this very basic, so I won't do that here. So we're going to click continue. And again, you're going to want to go ahead and test and review this to make sure it actually works. And if we go here, I'll go ahead and refresh just to show you the new checklist. Give it a second. You'll see it pop up right here. There we are. Prospecting checklist, week of September 3rd, 2020. Here I am assigned. We can actually go into it. And you'll see, of course, that it's already assigned here. This due date, again, that is 5 days plus September 3rd. So automatically sets that due date, which means if I don't complete this by September 8th, I will be notified. All right. So that is a basic way to build automations inside of Zapier with Process Street. All right. Again, I promised you we're going to go from basic to advanced. Ready? Okay, so this is what I like to call a full cycle automation. Okay. Now, whenever you're building your automations inside of Process Street, or really your automations anywhere, I always recommend that you build a full cycle automation. What that means is that you kick it off from some tool. In this case, we're going to be doing new client onboarding. So when new clients come in, there's an opportunity on that client, and we're going to mark that opportunity as closed won, right? So they've decided to pay us. Therefore, we're going to mark it as closed won. And therefore, the next step is that they need to be onboarded as a new client, right? And it would be really nice if a checklist could be automatically created in Process Street and filled out with the information from Salesforce. Well, that's part of this automation. That's the first bit here. Okay. Now, as we go along, we want it to then, maybe we're going to send them an email using the send email widget. And in that email is going to be a Calendly link that will allow our client to automatically book a time on our calendar. Once they do that, they can unlock the next steps of the process, notifying us as to who needs to do what, and that the meeting is booked. And it can also set all the due dates going along the line using dynamic due dates to say, okay, well, we need to prep for this meeting, we need to draft up the agenda, everything else that needs to get done. And then we actually run the meeting. We type our notes down inside of Process Street, real nice and easy. And when we're finally done, we can check off a final test that completes the checklist and simultaneously sends all of those notes back to Salesforce. That is the full cycle. In that sense, it is leaving from Salesforce to begin, where we're holding our customer data. We're able to still run a process and automate it through Process Street. And then we're able to push that data back into Salesforce, therefore closing the loop, ensuring that everyone, no matter what system you're in, has full visibility into our data. Okay? Let's stop talking about this in the hypothetical. Let me show this to you in action. I'm going to show it to you working first, how it would actually work in the process. And then I will show you how to build this, how it actually works. Okay? Let's do that. So to start, let's go into Salesforce. Let's take a look here. This is Apple as a company, big old Apple, you know, that company, the one who built the Mac that I'm currently working on right now. So this is that big company, and you can see here that we've got opportunity on them. This is just new business. It's $100,000. They want to pay us for strategic recommendations to their business. We're a consulting firm. So as we're going through here, we're going through the process, maybe we've said, okay, good to go. They want to pay us. They're happy with this. We're going to mark this stage as complete. We're going to move this to closed won. I would be, in this case, I'd probably be a salesperson, but obviously whoever did this doesn't really matter. We're going to mark that as closed won. We'll save that. And boom, they're now closed won. That kicks off the first step of this automation. What that will do is that will automatically, as you can see right here, kick off the creation of this checklist. So no one had to run this manually or anything like that. It automatically runs. Let's go on into it. So that creates the checklist. Now, in addition to creating the checklist, it's also filled out a ton of stuff for us. And we've tied that with those built-in features that I mentioned earlier inside of Process Street. So first up, we've got the assignee being automatically assigned. We've got the due date being automatically set. So that's a certain amount of time after the client first came in, essentially since we did this. And then also these form fields here are automatically filled out. I don't have to fill these out. I don't have to do anything. I just came directly into here. This is already done for me. I was actually able to go straight into inbox right here and see this information, right? The contact name is automatically pulled in. His email address is right here. It assigns the owner from Salesforce as the account manager. And this right here is what's called a members field. This automatically assigns all of the appropriate tasks to the account manager using what's called role assignments. So you don't even have to assign a specific person to all those tasks. You just assign this role, and then Zapier fills this out. And then once that happens, all of those tasks automatically go to this person. And that way, if we change this over, if it's someone else that owns it, it'll automatically assign all those tasks to that person. And no one actually has to do it manually. Finally, we've also, since that's actually a strategy consultation that they're paying us for, that particular package, it also filled this out for us. And we've used what's called conditional logic to show the appropriate things. If they paid us for that and recruitment services, you'll see that those tasks will pop up here first, but they didn't, so we'll go ahead and remove that. There we go. Next, we've also used what's called stop tasks in here. That actually limits the flow of this process to ensure that people aren't jumping ahead, and also to ensure that notifications are being sent out one by one. So even though I'm assigned to all of these tasks because I'm the account manager, I'm not going to receive all these notifications. I'm only going to see this one task inside of my inbox. So whatever is most pressing and coming up, it's actually an old one, you'll see is right there. Perfect. So we go ahead and check off this task, and we move forward. And now this would automatically assign the next person, show it up in inbox, and we can continue to move forward that way. So just to save you guys time, I'm not going to fill these things out, but I'll just go ahead and check these things off for you. And then again, we move on over to the approval. And again, what this did, this went ahead and sent an approval to me in this case, just keeping it easy. But it would send it to whoever the approver is with all of this information for them to approve or reject from their email inbox. Or of course, they come into here and they approve or reject it. Keep things easy, let's approve it and move forward. Now that we've approved that, that then opens us up to now notify the next person, which again, in this case is me. And in this case, what it'll do is it'll say, okay, now you gotta reach out to the client. And this right here, if we click send, would automatically open this up in what's called your default email handler, which for me is Gmail. And then all I have to do, again, I didn't have to write this email or do anything. It's already got the person's name. It's got his email address. It's got the link right here to book an event. And all I have to do is click send, and it'll send it. Well, let's go ahead and pretend for just a moment to be Steve Jobs. Or, well, yeah, Steve Jobs. Rest in peace. Now, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm going to book a time on this calendar. Let's just say 3:30 p.m. Monday, September 28th. Sounds great. So I'm Steve Jobs. Schedule that event. Awesome. Now Steve Jobs has scheduled that event with me, which would be really weird to show up on my calendar. I don't know what I would do. Now, as you can see in here, I can't move forward past this next task, meeting scheduled, right? I can't move forward because, well, there's no meeting date. There's nothing to do at this point, right? Well, using conditional logic, what I can do is say that when the meeting date has been set, we can go ahead and show the next steps. Importantly here, I should mention that these automations, as I'm showing them to you, are real, and they are happening in real time. Typically, when somebody were to book an event on your calendar, you're going to have probably a couple days or at least maybe a couple hours when you notice when that has happened, then you then manually go forward and do all the next steps. But in this case, it takes likely around a minute or two just for everything to kind of be noticed, picked up, and then run. So since I'm showing that to you in real time, it may take a little bit of a delay. But again, usually you won't even notice it because it'll just automatically happen. Now, when that actually runs, you'll see that this will go ahead and set that, and it will set all of these other due dates based off of this date right here. So as you see right here, these are dynamic. So 5 days before the meeting date, we need to have a meeting agenda. On the meeting date, we need to actually have the meeting, of course. And I've also got in here the meeting agenda, which we would actually write up, okay? Now, as we're going through, we would conduct the actual meeting, and we would go ahead and write up our notes. All right, now, finally, we've finished the meeting. It went very well. They bought us apparently. And now we need to send those notes right back into Salesforce, all right? So now we say yes to this, we complete this task, we complete the checklist, and what that will do is that will now send our meeting notes right back into Salesforce to that account. So let's go in here. As you see here, here's our meeting notes, here's the client's information, here's who did the onboarding and when, and here's the link right back to the checklist. Again, full cycle, you can go and see the information there, you can see it here. Whatever you need to do, you've got all your resources available to you. That is a full cycle automation. Now, I showed it to you in effect. Let's actually see how this works in the back end. To run this, we have 3 zaps, 3 automations to let this go, okay? The very first one is right here. This is the initial trigger of this is when a field is updated on a record in Salesforce. In this case, we've chosen Salesforce and update field on record as the app that we want to use, the system we want to use, and this is the specific event that we are watching for. Okay, when that happens, we want something to happen realistically. So in this case, we're going to customize that and say that object is an opportunity. So we're watching for opportunities where the stage has been moved to closed one. You guys saw me do that earlier. So when that happens, this will automatically trigger and grab a bunch of data. This is all about the opportunity. And importantly, this has things like the ID of the account and the ID of the owner right there. So because we have those IDs and because only Salesforce knows what those are, we can go right into here and we can use that information then to get information. So we want to find a record, and that record in this case is an account. We want to find it using the account ID, which we got from that first step. That will give us all the information about the account. In this case, it's Apple, of course. And that'll give you things like the owner of that account and then other things like whoever the contacts are. We're going to use that information as well to go into here to, again, we're going to find information. We're going to do a search. This time it's going to be the contact. We're going to use the contact ID. This is actually pulling from the opportunity as well. In this case, this contact is Steve Jobs. So we want to pull Steve Jobs information from Salesforce. Finally, we're going to grab the account manager information. So we have the owner from inside of Salesforce, and we're going to get a user. So a user is in somebody who's internal working in Salesforce. In this case, it's me. I'm the user. And I'd like it to grab my user ID because I am the owner of the opportunity, and therefore I'm the account manager in this case. And I would like to search for me, and that'll go ahead and pull up my information, just like that. Now, the final thing that we want to do as a part of this first step here is to create the checklist, right? We want to go ahead and automatically create the checklist, take all the information that it just found out, and we pulled it all from Salesforce, but you can pull from as many places as you want, and put it all together. We're going to create a checklist. We want to create a checklist specifically off of the client onboarding template. We're going to name it the client's name. We're going to set it due as whenever that thing was updated, that field is going to closed won. Whenever that happens, add 7 days to it. That's now the due date. We're going to assign a specific user. In this case, I'm assigning me, but we can rotate this as well if we like, but I'm just for simplicity going to use myself in some of these. The company, of course, Apple. Contact Steve, email sjobs@apple.com. Account manager, this is that rotating field that we are able to use with role assignments. In this case, I'm going to set it to me. Package option, for this particular one, is going to be strategy consultation, but we can rotate these so that it says whatever their correct package is. And this is really the most important part of the full cycle automation, is this right here. If you are going to set these up, you always want to have fields inside of your tools that give you a reference back to your other tools. In this case, we want the ID of the account from Salesforce to get pulled into Process Street, so that way later on in these steps you can go ahead and reference right back to that account. And this way we're able to push the note directly back to the account. It's never going to go to the wrong account. We always know it's going to go to the right place. So direct references are best. You want to have a place for those right here. And I also cheated down here. As you can see, I wrote the agenda right into here and the meeting notes. You would probably not do this, but I did it just because I didn't feel like typing all this in front of you guys. This made this a lot faster. So anyway, so once that does that, it goes ahead and creates the checklist. As you remember, that created the checklist. We went through the whole checklist right here, and eventually we reached out to the client. And as you see right here, it's got this link. We booked the Calendly event. So that booking of the Calendly event triggers the second automation. So when an invitee created, that's what it's called here. That just means when an invitee, a person, has booked an event in Calendly, we want that to kick this off. And we're really just going to say event. We're just going to choose the account. And because it's not specific, it's going to trigger for every single event. We want to go ahead and filter that down. So Zapier has some really cool built-in features, including filters and data manipulation and things like that. This is a filter. This allows you to say, I know that you're going to trigger for every event, but I don't really want you to run a client onboarding for, if somebody just books a support call with us. Don't do that. So instead, I want you to go ahead and only run for ones that are from Manhattan Management Company, the name of my hypothetical agency here. So if it contains this name, then go ahead and continue. Otherwise, stop. So if it does contain that name, we're going to go ahead and do this. This is the find checklist, because keep in mind that Calendly does not know what the ID of the checklist inside of Process Street is. It doesn't know how to reference it directly, okay? It only knows what it knows about the event, about the person who booked the event. So in this case, we're going to find a checklist off of client onboarding using the one piece of information that is the same between Calendly, the event, and Process Street, the checklist. And that is the invitee email. And remember when I pushed that in using that link right here? That allows us to ensure that that email address matches the email address up above. And in that way, when we're going through that automation, it's going to find the same checklist, right? So it'll find the same checklist. That's all it really needs to do. Once it does that, it'll go ahead and give us the information about that checklist. Most importantly, the checklist ID right there. Now that we have the checklist ID, we can actually update that checklist because we have a direct reference to it, and that is off of that client onboarding template. We now have that checklist ID that I just showed you. It'll pull that in. And whatever we want to update, in this case, that is the meeting date right here. It'll go ahead and update that, right? It'll go ahead and update that field. And again, we have conditional logic that then shows the next tasks once that field has a value. And then that way it notifies the next people down the line automatically. So it automatically updates that, and that is the end of the second component here. So at that point, this creates this, updates that field for us. And then as we go through this process, creating our agendas, notifying people as we go along, conducting the meeting, writing up our notes, and finally checking this task off, we're going to go ahead and send our notes back to Salesforce. Before I go there, though, I want to mention one thing here that is really important. See this right here, this little red asterisk? Well, this means that this is a required field. That means that you cannot complete this task unless this field has a value. So if this says no, or if this doesn't have a value here, we're not going to continue and send those notes to the CRM because, well, we don't want it to send those notes, right? So we don't want to willy-nilly, leave it open for people just to send things without thinking about it. We want to make sure that this is deliberate. It's going to create notes in Salesforce. This is the hybrid automation right here. This is where a human is in the line to say, yes, I approve, and then everything else is automated. And then that right here being checked off, this task kicks off the third and final component, which is that when a new task is checked off in process tree, what's going to happen, we're going to specify client onboarding template, and the task is add meeting notes to CRM. When this task is checked off of a checklist off of this template, then it's going to create a record, and that record is a note, it's the type of object here, inside of Salesforce. And we're going to go ahead and give that we're going to link that back to the Salesforce ID. This was a test checklist that I used here that didn't have a Salesforce ID, but it usually would, like in the one that I showed you. But anyway, so this is what you're using to reference back to the original account, in this case, Apple. It's going to send it's going to set the title of that particular note, onboarding notes. That's never going to change, but this part will, the date of the meeting. And then right here, this is that body of those notes that I showed you, right? So if we go back into here, here's that beautiful note that we see. That's how it's actually written. Here's the standard parts. Here's the little bits that are variable. Who did it, on what date? What was the contact's name? What's his email address or their email address? What are the notes from that meeting? And where's the link to that checklist? You can, of course, add in other pieces of information that you like, whatever you want. This is just how I built it out. And finally, let's go ahead and set that up as let's say the owner in this case is me. We can, of course, rotate this as well, but just keep it easy so we know exactly who wrote this, all right? So those are your three main steps that I have here for this big full cycle automation. Again, you want to build out full cycle automations whenever possible because it keeps data flowing all the way around. And of course, use as many automated features as you can. However, there are some considerations. First off, when you're talking about automations, first off, we want to consider is that you always want to run tests. And specifically, you want to run what's called unit tests, okay? That's where every single step of your process, so any of these zaps that I set up, I was testing every single component. Does this connect to process tree? Yes. Can it find this checklist? Yes. Can it create this note? Yes, etc. So on and so forth. I'm testing each individual part as I'm going along and fixing any little things that come up before I try and put it all together. And that way, you don't build everything up and then you try and test it and it starts breaking and you don't know why. It's way easier just to kind of test it as you go and then move forward and know that you have a really nice, beautiful, fully working process. Additionally, as you now then at that point have it running, if you make updates to your, say for example, your template in Process Tree or really any other tool that's connected to your automation, you want to make sure that that doesn't mess up your Zap, mess up your automation. Realistically, Zapier in this case is looking for specific fields, specific checklists, specific records, everything, right? That if you change something that it's looking for, it may not find it. Right? So you want to pay attention when you make those updates and just, keep a good watch on your automations to make sure that they don't break when these things happen. And if they do, just go in and fix them. It's not very hard. Next, I always recommend, this is sort of a lifestyle, which is defaulting to automation. In your life, what I recommend doing is whenever you do anything, make a note of it. I don't mean necessarily write it down, but just make a note of anything that you do more than once, really. And just note, is this something that requires just really enhanced human stuff like visual processing or creative work or human connection or something like that? If it's along those lines, like having a vocal conversation with somebody, you can't automate that really. So don't worry about those things. But if it doesn't fit into those categories, well, there's a good chance you can automate it. And so you always want to be thinking on that level of, I keep doing this thing over and over again. I keep sending this email. I keep filtering things out. I keep working through all these different things, but I don't really need to be doing them. I could probably automate them. But importantly, before you actually automate it, what I recommend that you do is optimize it first. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to look at your process. And of course, at Process Tree, we consider that very heavily. Look at your process and consider places where that process can be made better first, and then automate that process. If you automate a bad process, well, you're just pushing along those same bad things, just making it automated. But the bad things are still there. In fact, that might even be worse because now those things are just going to get propagated along. So always make your process better, make it more efficient wherever you can, and then automate those things rather than going the other way around. As I mentioned before, always build in full cycle automations when possible to ensure that data is not getting stuck in one system. If you didn't push those notes back into Salesforce, for example, somebody might then go in and run a checklist, right? And therefore, there's going to be multiple onboardings. That customer is going to be like, hey, I already did this onboarding. Why are you reaching out to me? But if you push that data back, you'll never run into that problem. Also, you have to consider whether or not to automate or not to automate. Of course, this is that famous Shakespearean quote, you know, to automate or not. No, I'm just kidding. But you want to consider whether or not you should or shouldn't. And really the reason why you shouldn't is either A, it's something that, as I mentioned before, is something that's specifically human that you should be doing, and really you can't really automate. Or maybe it's something that you do very sparingly, so maybe once a year and it takes you 2 minutes. Don't spend 3 hours automating that, because you're not going to get a payback on that for 100 years. And I mean, unless you live that long, who knows? But you want to consider whether or not to automate or not to automate. Usually automating is good, but there's times where you don't go overboard. Finally, keep good records of your automations. Make sure to name them well. Make sure to, for example, inside a process tree, make sure to note that certain tasks are going to kick off an automation, because if you only know that, somebody's going to start creating files or sending legal documents to your clients or something without them knowing it. So always make a note of when things are automated, put in fail safes, and if you can also create some documentation about what things do, things to look out for, how to fix it, etc. So then that way it's not just you that has that knowledge, so that way you don't get bugged. Importantly, putting all of that stuff together will mean that you will have more trips to Fiji or wherever else you want to go. Of course, post-COVID, but then the reason for that, of course, is that your manual labor, the things you actually have to do repetitively, are going to go down, which means you have more time to do fun things. Now I'm going to hang around here and answer your questions, and I know I've already got quite a few. Okay, so let's see here. The first question I have is, do you support any others besides Zapier? How about AppyWay? So the two that we currently support are Zapier and Integromat, just in the sense that we are currently connected to them. And that's just in terms of our direct connections to those different tools. You can, of course, use the webhooks or the checklist run links, like I mentioned previously, to connect to other tools that you like. That's totally possible, potentially even AppyWay as well. But the direct connections are Zapier and Integromat. Okay, next question here. Next question here from Mark. What was the second? Oh, right. What was the second connector? So there's Zapier and Integromat. 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 I recommend checking them both out. Try them both out as ways to connect Process Street. You can sign up again for both of them for free and use them forever for free if you want to. They have more advanced features if you pay, of course, as everything goes. Okay. How would you recommend to use information in Process Tree to fill out a template on Google Docs? Oh, that's one of my favorite ones. In fact, I believe that is, yeah. So by the way, for anyone who's interested, I did this webinar or a version of this webinar last year. It was our most viewed webinar and still is our most viewed webinar, even in recordings. And I actually did go through how to do that. So I believe you can find the automation webinar on our YouTube channel and on our help site. You can find that there, and that actually takes you through how to do this. But the basic concept is, for everyone else, inside of Google Docs, and that can be Google Docs itself, that could be Google Slides as well, you can create what's called a template. And that template is just essentially a document that contains variables, contains fields that you're going to pull information from something like, say, Process Street, and fill out that template. So that could be like a contract or an invoice or a roadmap or something like that, where it's going to have a lot of standard components, the general formatting, the general spacing, the coloring, where things go, all that sort of stuff. But then it has variable bits, things that are going to change, and you can sort of pull that information from, say, Process Street and automatically generate a new Google Doc that essentially merges the stuff from Process Street with the standard stuff from Google Docs in that template, puts it together, generates the brand new Google Doc with all that information, and then you can do whatever you like with it. So again, we use that, for example, for our I think this is the example I used last year for what's called our quarterly business analysis. So quarterly business review, QBR, with our largest clients. So what we do is we have a process that we run. We run it actually using a run link from Salesforce. Click that link, it automatically generates a brand new process tree checklist with filled out with all the client's information. And then we grab their logo and we do a couple little things here and there. And then we check off a task that automatically then generates essentially kicks off that Zap, pulls information from the checklist, goes into Zapier, goes to Google Slides in that case, pulls all of it into a slide template that we have, fills it out with all of the correct customer information customized for them. And then it actually goes back, it updates our checklist in Process Street with a link back to that Google slide that we can go in and edit and make modifications to, and another link that gives us the download of the PDF version of that slide. So if we make edits to it, that link will always be the live, most up-to-date version, and we can download it, we can send it to our clients, etc. And that's how we run our quarterly business reviews. And once we're done with the quarterly business review, we complete the process. I can send an email to the client that updates everything and sends it all back into Salesforce. Again, another full cycle automation. If you have any questions, I want you to contact our support. That is support@process.st. Support@process.st. And by the way, all of this stuff that I showed you here today, really, I mean, this is what I do. You know, I build these automations. Everything in my life, not even just Process Street or Zapier stuff, is automated. I have over, I think, 200 automations running in Zapier alone. I've got about 30 in Integromat. I've got about 150 in Alfred. It's another tool that I use. There it is right there, that I love on my Mac. I've got 30 different Chrome apps. I've got a bunch of different Mac apps that automate everything. So everything that I do, if I do it more than once, it is automated. It's kind of what I'm known for. And so this is what I love to work with. And so if you are a customer here, or if you're considering to be a customer here, these are the sorts of things that me and my team are really good at working with you on to teach you how to do and to make happen. And so we're likely going to do more of these sorts of webinars in the future, more automation webinars, because of course there's a big demand for it. It's a really interesting and exciting thing. So if you have any sort of thing that's specific that you'd like to see, whether it be automation or other types of webinars, also write our support to let us know what you'd like to see, because like I said here, I manage the content team and I love to get more and more ideas for things that we can do. So again, thank you so very, very much for everyone who attended today. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of work to get this done. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think. And well, take care and have a wonderful weekend.